Character is what you do when no one is watching. Or another modification of that statement, character is who you are when no one is watching. I just thought that talking about character today seemed rather poignant and significant. Because I don't know about you, but it seems like it has become a daily thing. And just here in the last week or so, a daily thing to be hearing about the moral indiscretion of visible people in our society, like movie stars and directors and athletes and politicians. And I don't know if it's just gotten worse, that behavior has degraded that much, or the media decided, we're not going to protect these people anymore. We're going to bring it all out. I don't know which it is, and maybe it doesn't matter. But it just seems significant today to talk about character, to talk about integrity, when it sure does seem like it is in short supply in the times that we live in. I think that there is no better biblical example aside of Jesus Christ himself of integrity and godly character than a young man by the name of Daniel. And as someone has said about him, he was taken from his homeland while still a teenager. And this is significant, especially for the teens in this room, that he was probably no more than 15 years old. 13 to 15 years old. At that age, he was taken from his homeland as a teenager. He was pushed through a highly competitive crash course in foreign culture. And in this person, we find a model of integrity, flawless to the core. And that is a very, very good summary of a young teenager by the name of Daniel. And so it is relevant, it is extremely relevant that we look at Daniel, we look at integrity, we look at character, and we look at character qualities that we need to learn about and certainly incorporate into our lives. So number one, character stands when our world comes crashing down. If you will look at the first two verses in Daniel 1, it says that in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. A date that stood out obviously in the life of Daniel. This letter that bears his name talks about right away a life-changing date. In the third year of the reign of a particular king of Judah, everything changed. Nebuchadnezzar, no doubt, is a familiar figure if you know anything about history, powerful leader. And so in a particular time, the third year of the reign of this king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar came and overran Jerusalem and Israel and Judah. And so for young Daniel, again a teenager of probably 13 to 15 years of age, his world was absolutely upended. Everything changed with great suddenness. We don't know a thing about his life in Judah. We don't know what his earlier life was like. But the narrative begins on the day when everything changed. And no doubt it changed very suddenly. And to linger on that for just a little bit, it's kind of a sobering thing to think about how quickly things can change in our lives as well. So we read this, and it's easy to be kind of detached from that, but thinking that these things could happen to us as well, that our world suddenly changes. And I'm so thankful that we enjoy a relatively normal life. I like the routine, especially as I get older. I like the routine of a so-called normal life. Life goes on, but it's very easy to take for granted the life that goes on day to day in this culture and country that we live in. It could change in a moment, as it no doubt changed for Daniel. And I probably don't need to give you all the ways that it could change, but in a moment on Monday morning when the markets open, there could be a major financial crisis that could change everything for us just like that. As we know, there could be an act of terrorism today or very soon, that would change everything in our culture and our city. There could certainly be an outright military attack or a natural disaster, such as has happened in many places in recent months, and the list could go on, and I guess I don't need to scare you with all of those things. But life can change drastically, quickly, and indeed it did for a young teenager by the name of Daniel. And it says here, and this is interesting because noting how God is in control of everything, it says that the Lord gave this king over to King Nebuchadnezzar the conqueror. And that kind of speaks to the character issue that we're talking about today. It was because of a lack of moral character by God's chosen people in Judah and Israel that the Lord gave over that land, that king, those people to a pagan conqueror, because they had bowed down in idol worship. They had forsaken the Lord their God. And so because of a lack of character, this divine punishment came upon those people. So a moral compromise was the real reason why the story begins as it does. And again, I think about Daniel, who's going to be front and center. He's just a young teenager. He hasn't lived much of life. And in a sense, he wasn't responsible for the judgment that came upon him. It was the sins of the father, so to speak. And I think of how Daniel could have reacted to that no doubt he could have been a very bitter young man. He could have been morally unrestrained because his world was falling apart. But the more we look at him, the more we see his life, the more we appreciate him so much. Character refuses to budge when the world is bent on squeezing us into its mold. Again, something we're going to especially notice about Daniel. You're probably familiar with Romans chapter 12, verse 2. I like the New Century Translation that says, "Do not be shaped by this world. Instead, be changed within by a new way of thinking." The world wants to shape us into its mold. We know that. Advertising and just pressure from our culture, we live in a world that wants to make us ungodly. And there's constant pressure upon us. Whatever it is that we face, it's nothing compared to what young Daniel faced. I want you to look in verses 3 to 5. It says that the king ordered, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name because I have a lot of trouble with some of these Old Testament names. Doesn't matter. You can read it and pronounce it any way you want. But the Lord ordered him, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Talk about a culture that wanted conformity. And you think about what we've just read there and what it is that is about to befall young Daniel, this young teenager. He is about to be immersed in a youth retraining program. We might call it a cultural immersion program. But as a very promising young man, he's among a number of young people that are now about to be retrained to try to get the Jewish belief system out of their system, to get rid of Yahweh God in particular, and now to replace it with all of the culture of the Babylonians, the Chaldeans. And so immense pressure from that culture is about to fall upon Daniel. And you know, Nebuchadnezzar, pretty wise king, knowing what he can accomplish if he can retrain this generation of youth. And throughout history, some of the most effective movements have been youth movements. And so, in a sense, if you can create youth heroes and leaders, if you can create those that young people will look up to, leaders that can be emulated, if you can capture the attention of a youthful generation, then you have won over a great victory. You have a whole generation now that are going to follow whatever it is that you want. And, for that reason in our culture, high school campuses and college campuses are targeted by social and political action groups. Impress those young minds, and again, if you can turn them at a young age, you probably got them for life. Adolf Hitler certainly knew that. He started a famous youth movement during his regime. And so, again, it's very effective if you can get the youth. And so Nebuchadnezzar, being a wise ruler, targeted, as we just read here, some of the brightest and the best youth that could be found that were brought in as captives from Judah and Israel. In particular, he wants some of those who are of royalty, some of those who are socially very, very important. He wants those who are physical specimens. He wants the eye candy of the youth, so to speak, the good-looking ones. He wants the intelligent ones. And he wants those basically that are leaders of young people because he wants to retrain them. And so they are perfect candidates for influencing other youth. And also he wants to put them into a 3-year training program. That amount of time is very significant. Some college programs are 3 years in length. It is an interesting coincidence. Jesus trained his disciples for about 3.5 years. And so if you line things up, if you do the right kind of teaching and influence, in 3 years' time again, you thoroughly have those people through that. And so no doubt that is his objective, is to train these individuals. So if you look in verse 6, it says, "Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah." So the focus now is upon 4, and of course in particular there will be 1. Verse 7, "The commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego." So, training objective number 1, if you want to influence this youth culture, is giving new names. New name signifies a new beginning. That's a good thing often in Scripture. God gives new names. Abram became Abraham, signifying the new beginning God had in his life. Well, in a negative sense, so it is with these Jewish young men. Let's give them new names. Maybe they'll live up to the reputation of the name that we give to them. And the names are very, very significant. The name Daniel literally means God is judge. As it says, he is given the name Belteshazzar, which literally means Bel provides, or Bel's prince, B-E-L, the name of a pagan god. And so his new name says that he is now a disciple of the god Bel or Baal. And so again, the idea is that he will live up to the reputation of his name. And so the name Hananiah, his young friend, Hananiah means Yahweh is gracious. He becomes Shadrach, which literally means the command of the moon god. And so now he's following another god instead of Yahweh God. And Mishael, whose name means who is like God, is given the name of Meshach, which means who is like Venus. Again, another pagan god, no doubt that he's supposed to emulate. And Azariah, his name means Yahweh is my helper. He becomes Abednego, the servant of the god Nego. And so again, a new name indicates a new beginning for them, a new retraining that they might become like these heroes that Nebuchadnezzar wants them to emulate. Character remains, again, back to the subject of character. Character remains amidst privilege. And I want you to notice what is said here about the retraining program of these 4 young men. They are given a pretty prosperous situation. They're taken captive into a foreign land, but they don't have it too bad, do they? It talks about the fact that they're going to eat food that would go to the king. They're going to drink some of the wine that would be of his portion. So they're going to get the best of the food. And it's interesting, it's been said that men can stand adversity better than prosperity. And isn't that the case? Going through hard times builds character, but prosperity, maybe not so much. A lot of times prosperity is the ruination of someone. Give them a lot of good things, and that compromises their character. I look at verse 8. It says that Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Again, these four young men had it pretty good. Daniel in particular, who is the focus, getting this rich food, probably food like he had never had before back in Judah, and this nice wine as well. And no doubt all of it must have been very, very enticing, but I so appreciate what I read at the beginning of verse 8. Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself. Again, a young teenager, 13 to 15 years old, what a tribute, I would say, to his parents in particular that we know nothing about. Somehow they had certainly trained him up in a God-honoring way. But Daniel, taking his stand as a teenager, instead of caving in and saying, well, this is a pretty good life. There's a lot of people that would like to have the life that we have, and yeah, maybe this thing's all right. Maybe God's allowing all. No, Daniel stood up because he knew the law of God. He knew the dietary laws of Leviticus, I think, in particular, but he knew something else about that food, that no doubt it was offered as a sacrifice to pagan gods. So there's two counts against the food and the wine that's set before Daniel, and it says Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself. And so we look at Daniel as certainly a great example of character and integrity. And along with that, character speaks when silence is an option. Because I want you to notice in verse 8 where it says that he sought permission from the commander of the officials. He sought permission for a different diet. And we won't read these other verses, but he said, hey, we just want vegetables and water for a period of time. Just test us in that. And we just want to have vegetables instead of this rich food from the king's table. And just see how this goes. The official was very, very concerned. You know, if you guys don't look as good as the rest of the youth, my head's on the chopping block, so to speak. And so if you don't look very healthy, I'm in a lot of trouble. He said, just test us in it. But I've made up my mind. I don't want that food. I want a diet that honors my God. And so that's how things played out. But it says that he sought permission. And I think of how this thing could have gone. Daniel could have maybe scraped the food off of his plate. Could have maybe made no big deal of it. Could have gone out maybe secretly and found some vegetables and found the kind of food that he felt he should eat. He could have been very discreet and very quiet about it. But it says that he went forward and sought out the permission of the commander to do this. Again, integrity. He is straightforward with what it is that he wants to do in consistency with worshiping his God. You probably have heard the saying that silence isn't always golden. Sometimes it's just plain yellow. And such is the case. He could have kept quiet. He could have not made a big deal of this. But how great that Daniel spoke up. Daniel chapter 1 verse 9, as we're looking down through here, it says, now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. So not only is Daniel speaking up before this man in charge of him, but notice again, and I so much appreciate this theme, God is in charge of what's going on. God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the eyes of this man who was set over him. You know, maybe there's a principle of that. When we seek to please God, when we seek to be people of character and integrity as Daniel was, that God goes before us and grants favor for those that might work against us. So it matters to be a person of integrity and character. God will bless in that. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 7 says that when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. And I think that applied to Daniel and applied to this man over him. He was basically an enemy, but Daniel's ways were pleasing to the Lord, and God made even his enemies to be at peace with him. Character guides us. Again, a lesson and an example I want to pull from Daniel. Character guides when knowledge would compromise. We know about knowledge, how it builds up, it puffs up. Love builds up, 1 Corinthians 8:1. But if you look in verses 17 to 21 of the story here, it talks about the four U's, that God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Then at the end of the days, when the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king talked with them, and out of them no one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who are in all this realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. God gave them over to learning a system of literature and knowledge of the Chaldean Babylonian system, which I think about that for a moment, that God allowed them to excel in learning that which was very anti-God system. And that kind of baffles me, but yet God always has the last word, doesn't He? And so while it sounds like this is a recipe for compromise, the more these young men learn this system and get it into their head, they're probably going to be anti-God themselves. And so Nebuchadnezzar will succeed in what he wanted to succeed in. But somehow they've learned all of this, and yet it has not corrupted their character. Again, we have the utmost respect for Daniel and his three friends, because in this cultural immersion program, all their learning, which again must have been against God and His system, did not in any way affect their character. God literally would eventually turn tables. He would use those four young men that Nebuchadnezzar trying to get God out of their system. Instead, God would use this system to bring God into Babylon and the Chaldean system itself. It is an absolutely amazing testimony to look ahead a few more chapters at what King Nebuchadnezzar, who wanted to retrain them, what happened to him. Talk about turning the tables. Nebuchadnezzar, the mighty king, would declare, as recorded in chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. I just love what he came to say and realize. He said, "It has seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High God has done for me. How great are His signs! How mighty are His wonders! His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and His dominion is from generation to generation." Isn't it amazing how God worked all that out? Here He wants to retrain a whole generation of Israelites, training this young generation. And instead, through Daniel and these three friends who maintain lives of character and integrity, ultimately Nebuchadnezzar recognizes their God instead of the other way around. What kind of difference does character and integrity make? Tremendous, tremendous difference. Again, that saying that character is what you do when no one is watching. Again, back to the age that we live in, an age when moral character seems to be in short supply. It is good to go back to this young teenager named Daniel and his three friends and lift them up as great examples to be emulated. Daniel, if we learn about his life, he would spend his whole life living in exile down in Babylon. He would be elevated to some of the highest government positions available. He would be tested as an old man in a den of lions. He would see the rise and fall of at least three great empires. He saw a lot of change, a lot of turmoil in his life. But throughout his life, noted that his character and his integrity never, ever wavered. Again, what an example. We can come up with a negative example, a very lengthy list of individuals who have compromised in character and integrity. As we mentioned, celebrities and athletes and businessmen and women and politicians. The list goes on, especially in these recent times. And we can think about young people of the age of Daniel who compromise, for example, going off to college, maybe raised in a good Christian environment, but forgetting everything they learn when they go to a secular campus. Again, many examples of those that compromise. Sadly, even pastors who have proven to not be men of character as they profess to be. We can have a lengthy list of those who did not exhibit character, but we lift up a list of four men who certainly are bright, shining examples. As Christians, we are judged not on the basis by our world of what we say, but on the basis of character, which is why it's important to look at individuals of character as we have done this morning. I'm thinking when I think about how young they were of 1 Timothy 4, verse 12. Paul said to Timothy, "Let no one look down on your youthfulness, but rather in speech and conduct and love, faith and purity, show yourself as an example to those who believe." And they are prime examples of those who did exactly that. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 says, "Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the things in which they slander you as evildoers, that they may be, because of your good deeds as they observe them, glorify God." on the day of visitation. Tables will be turned. If we are people of character and integrity, those who would try to drag us down instead will glorify God as they look at our lives and say, they are people of impeccable character, and it is worthy of noting that and worshiping the God that they serve as well. More contemporary example, UCLA coach John Wooden made this statement about character. I thought it was good to share with you. He said, be more concerned with your character than your reputation, because your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think you are. Again, that lines up with what we consider here of Daniel and his friends. Be more concerned about character. We might have a good reputation even for a period of time. That's not nearly as important as character, what we are through and through in our lives. And so we are challenged again to be people of character. If we have a desire for character, God will certainly help to develop it and maintain it based on at least a couple verses I leave you with this morning. Proverbs 2, verses 6 to 8. The Lord gives wisdom. From His mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice. And He preserves the way of His godly ones. Indeed, character matters. God is concerned about it. God protects us. And finally, 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30. The Lord declares, those who honor me, I will honor. So when we seek to honor God, not only through our words, but through our character, God will honor us. There's an old hymn entitled, Dare to be a Daniel. And I thought that's fitting to think about that as we've considered Daniel here this morning. We do well to dare to be a Daniel, whether we're a teenager or maybe not so close to being a teenager, standing, whatever our age, whatever our situation, standing with character and integrity, because as we know so well recently, the world sure does need some shining examples. May we be those examples. Amen.